episode has been brought to you by Schedulicity.
Welcome to episode 121 of the Connected Yoga Teacher podcast. In today's episode, I want to talk to you about one of my favorite topics, yoga for pelvic health. And we have had some amazing episodes that go into detail around specific pelvic health issues on this podcast. And I will definitely link to those in the show notes. Today, though, I want to take a bit of a step back and give you an overview of why I think yoga is such an amazing gift for anyone's pelvic health, and how when we know some of this information and then we're able to use this information, it can really change the way we practice and teach yoga. In today's episode, I want to share my own personal story and how that story led me to specialize in yoga for pelvic health. I also want to cover the 4 key elements of yoga for pelvic health and why yoga makes such a difference, and then how this information can be used. So I am going to give you just a few examples that you can practice, try out, and possibly share with your yoga students. And then at the end of today's episode, I also want to tell you about a really big and exciting project that I have been working on for a while, and it feels scary to share it here, just so you know. It's pretty vulnerable, but it's also so exciting, and I know it is going to help so many yoga teachers who, like me, are wanting to use what we're learning and knowing about pelvic health to empower our yoga students. So stay tuned for that. I will share more at the end. If you're new here, welcome. My name is Shannon Crow. I'm a mother of 3, a yoga teacher, and a trainer and consultant working for yoga teachers. And this podcast was created for you because, wow, I get it. This is a place where you can connect to information and inspiration every single week and feel supported as you navigate those jungles of yoga entrepreneurship. Because, like I said, I get it. There are some tough days and tough moments when you're running a business as a yoga teacher. Anything I reference today is available for you in our show notes, so make sure to go check out the show notes. You can find that at theconnectedyogateacher.com/121. And before we dive in and talk more about pelvic health, and specifically yoga for pelvic health, let's hear our hot tip of the week from Schedulicity.
Connected Yoga Teachers, this is Chelsea from Schedulicity with a hot tip of the week. Schedulicity's package management add-on is a great option for yoga teachers. This allows you to create an incentive package with a discount that can add value to your students' visits and help ensure their return business. If each one of your classes costs $10, you could create a 5 for $40 package and offer it online. Then, when your clients are booking a class, they'll see this option. Payment is required upfront for packages, so you'll be paid and they'll have a great reason to come back. Maybe one 5-class package is all they need to turn their yoga practice into a habit.
Thank you so much, Team Schedulicity. If you're not sure what Schedulicity is, it's a scheduling software. And honest to goodness, this is an amazing software, and most importantly, an amazing team of people who put it together and make it happen. They are a fantastic team, and their customer service is what really drew me to this company way back in 2011. I love how I can reach out to Schedulicity with a question, but also a suggestion like, hey, I would love it if the software did this. And some of those suggestions happen, and I always feel heard by Schedulicity. So if you're wanting to check it out, they sponsor the podcast. They're in our show notes as well each and every week. Alrighty, let's dive in. Let me share where my passion for all things pelvic health actually began. This is way back in 2014, and I was diagnosed with diastasis recti. And I was actually diagnosed by a pelvic floor physiotherapist who we have had on the podcast twice, Dr. Shannon DeFore. An interesting thing about this, I didn't book an appointment with Sinead. Instead, we, the team at the Mama Nurture Prenatal Yoga School, had hired her as a speaker to come in and talk with our soon-to-be registered prenatal yoga teachers. Sinead was on the schedule to talk with us for 3 hours, really introducing our Mama Nurture students to this information, everything we needed to know about pelvic health for our pre- and postnatal yoga students. I had no idea then what diastasis was, let alone that I had it, and such a wealth of other information that she brought to that 3-hour talk. So if you want to know a lot more about diastasis, go back to theconnectedyogateacher.com/33, and there you can learn all about the new research, which was just released in 2017 by 22 pelvic health experts, and that was put together with Sinead and another person. Really quickly, though, I will tell you that when I was diagnosed, many people were still calling it a separation of the rectus abdominis muscles. Those are your six-pack abs at the front of your body. And you might still hear it called that. And we now know that it's more about this overstretching or sometimes damage that happens at the linea alba. That's the tissue that's in line with your belly button. And this stretching is normal in pregnancy, and there is definitely some degree of stretching at the midline. But what I didn't know is that my low back pain that I'd been having since my very first pregnancy was really interrelated to this diastasis recti and my overall core stability or core strength. So why didn't I know this? Well, it's kind of the way it is here in Canada, in a lot of places around the world. Maybe not in places like in France. So in France, a woman will see a pelvic floor physio about 11 times around pregnancy and as they become new parents. As a Canadian, though, in the 3 pregnancies and births that I had, no one talked to me about pelvic health. I didn't even know about my pelvic floor. I for sure didn't know all of the things I could have been doing prenatally, during childbirth, and postnatally to help my pelvic health. Things that I could be doing or things that maybe I might not want to be doing. And wow, a lot has changed since then. And this is what really fuels me to share this information with yoga teachers so that they can share it with their yoga students. So the more I learn, the more I want to share. So let me go even further back in the story to the very first time I met a pelvic floor physiotherapist. I was actually standing in line at a really small coffee shop in town between teaching yoga classes when this woman in line behind me began chatting, just like, "Hey, how are you?" We were waiting in line for coffee. This woman found out that I was a prenatal yoga teacher, and she asked me if I had heard of pelvic floor physiotherapy, which, if you're from the US, is physical therapy. Same thing. And I had no idea what she was talking about. And she quickly filled me in on all the things that she helped pregnant and postnatal and not pregnant and postnatal women and men with. And I was amazed because she was listing off things that many of my pre- and postnatal students were telling me that they were dealing with. So I asked her for some business cards, and I began to refer anyone to her that started talking to me about things like hip pain, incontinence, or being pregnant. What I didn't know is that I would be in her office learning about my own pelvic health years later when Dr. Sinead DeFord told me that I had diastasis recti. So this physiotherapist is in my local area. She's amazing. Her name is Janice Taylor, so shout out to Janice. And she has been specializing in pelvic health for years. So when I met Janice, I didn't know that my low back pain and this really stuck feeling in my hip were even related to my pelvic health. So in that first visit with Janice, I found out how I could just do a few simple movements over a couple of weeks, and that could really help the tissue at my linea alba. My back pain went away, my hip didn't feel as stuck, and I finally felt like, wow, that's a whole other area of my body that I have been ignoring and no one has been talking to me about, which is kind of bizarre if you think about it. So I studied anatomy in college. I studied anatomy as a yoga teacher, and I don't remember anyone talking to me about pelvic health. Then I went on to birth 3 babies with doctors and midwives, and still no one was talking to me about pelvic health. So that was it. That's what got the ball rolling. I just wanted to learn more, share more with my students, bring this into my own yoga practice. So in the next Mama Nurture prenatal yoga teacher training, which was closer to my area, closer to Janice, she came in to talk with our prenatal yoga teachers for 3 hours. And I learned even more. It was like there isn't this one script. there was so much information. And so as I've gone along this path, it really has changed the way I do yoga, and then it changed the way I taught yoga. So what I'd love to do in this next little part is to introduce you to some of that information, just a few pieces of the information, and some ways that you might invite this into your own practice. If it feels like a good fit, then it might also trickle out into your yoga classes. Who knows? Before we dig right in, I just want to share what I have outlined as the 4 key elements to yoga for pelvic health and talk a little bit about each one. Now, I could go on and on about this, obviously. That's why I've developed trainings around this, but I just want to give you a brief introduction here. So the 4 elements to yoga for pelvic health and why yoga is such a great tool to use for our pelvic health. The 4 elements are breath, alignment, movement, and information. Let me tell you a little bit about each one. And just so you know, back at the show notes page, I have a chart for you as well and this list. Again, it's theconnectedyogateacher.com/121. Let's start with breath or pranayama. We all know the impact that breath can have on the mind and the body. And there could be an entire podcast dedicated to talking about breath all on its own. Actually, I'm kind of curious. Is there a pranayama podcast? How amazing would that be? And I don't mean just one episode. There could be just episode after episode about breath. But let's come back to right here. I want to highlight a few key things about the breath and what is happening when we breathe and how it relates to pelvic health. And this is where the chart comes in. So if you're a visual learner, again, go back to the show notes. So on the inhale, the rib cage expands. On the exhale, the rib cage comes back to center. On the inhale, the diaphragm moves down. And on the exhale, the diaphragm moves up. And the pelvic floor does the same thing, the same movement as the diaphragm. On the inhale, pelvic floor moves down. And on the exhale, the pelvic floor moves up. And this happens naturally. There's no need to try an effort or do something here. It just happens. A lot of the times we think about the breath and we think about the lungs. And yes, for sure, on the inhale, the lungs expand, and on the exhale, the lungs shrink. But it doesn't begin. We don't start by moving the lungs. We start by moving the rib cage. So see what it's like to play around and practice with thinking about the rib cage. And we'll get into that. I'm going to cue that in a moment here. So when we inhale, rib cage expands, diaphragm and pelvic floor move down, the lungs expand, and the air gets pulled into the lungs. On the exhale, the rib cage relaxes, the diaphragm and pelvic floor move up, the lungs shrink, and the air gets forced out of the lungs. There's a few really key points to this. The diaphragm and the pelvic floor move together. So remember that. We're going to talk about that in a moment. To expand the lungs, we need to move the rib cage. We breathe into the lungs. So we don't breathe into the belly. There is an expansion that happens at the belly because the lungs fill, the diaphragm descends, and that presses the organs down into the abdominal cavity. We're not actually breathing into the belly though. And I like to just simplify this at the beginning when I'm working with students and focus on the rib cage part of this. Another key note here is that we are all doing diaphragmatic breathing, unless we're paralyzed in some way. And in that case, a machine would be doing that breath for us. So lots of times you'll hear people say, take a diaphragmatic breath. You'll hear this in yoga classes, other movement modalities, in physio. Just remember that we are doing diaphragmatic breathing. And what I think people are meaning by that is this rib cage breath. So we're thinking about the way the diaphragm moves and how to move the diaphragm. The second element we talk about a lot in yoga is alignment. And I want to clarify in this part that I really believe that alignment is about the individual yoga student in front of us or our individual body, not about the yoga pose. So when I'm saying alignment, I'm not talking about where you put your feet in Warrior Two. I really believe that where you place your feet really depends on your unique needs or the unique needs of your yoga students and the body that they are practicing in that moment. So we definitely have general guidelines for yoga shapes, yoga poses. Shelley Prosco actually talked about it in a previous episode. We had a 2-part episode, which is amazing, and she talked about alignment in that. Definitely go back and check that out if you're curious. But what I just want to highlight here is we need to come back to the yoga student that is in front of us and their unique needs. And also in alignment in terms of pelvic health, we're looking at how we align in our posture. So if we think about the natural curves of the spine, the 3 diaphragms, pelvic floor, respiratory diaphragm, and the thoracic outlet, and then also bringing pelvis to neutral. So how can we come into this alignment when we're standing, sitting, or moving through our various yoga forms? So to really highlight this alignment and why it's even part of yoga for pelvic health, try this. So from sitting or standing, bring one hand towards your low abdomen with the palm facing down towards the floor and the thumb side of your hand towards your abdomen, and that's representing your pelvic floor. And bring the other hand to your sternum. Again, palm faces towards the floor and the thumb side of the hand is at the sternum, and that represents your diaphragm. As you inhale, lower both of your hands slightly. This is how the diaphragm and the pelvic floor move together. And on the exhale, both hands rise up a little bit, signifying the diaphragm and pelvic floor rising up a little bit. So on the inhale, visualize them lowering as you lower your hands. And on the exhale, visualize them rising up as you rise your hands up a little bit. Now hunch over a little, or maybe a lot, and see what happens. And this is a really great way to illustrate why alignment and posture matter so much towards our pelvic health. Now, this doesn't mean that we have to walk around standing up straight all the time. Sometimes we need to bend over and tie up our shoes or pick up our kids or get the groceries. This just helps us to notice, how am I through my day sitting or standing or moving? And why is this important to my pelvic health? The third piece of pelvic health is movement. And as yoga teachers, we really understand the importance of movement on so many levels. So movement is this key element in our overall yoga practice and also pelvic health. And as yoga teachers, we can do so many things with movement. We are building strength, we're increasing mobility, we're helping our students maintain their balance and their flexibility. And I feel like I don't even need to go into a lot of detail about that. You are all doing that so often with your students. What I would love to highlight, though, is that simple movements, like going to sit down in a chair or squatting down to tie our shoes, are movements that we want our students to be able to do with awareness. And there are ways to incorporate alignment and breath to really help with pelvic health. Another aspect of yoga that helps with both the calming of the nervous system and pelvic health is the more yin side of yoga. So I don't mean yin as in Paul Grilly yin yoga, although that's in this category, and Paul Grilly's amazing. For sure that's included, but I mean like yin in terms of the opposite of yang. So I'm thinking more of shavasana, restorative yoga, yin yoga, meditation, pranayama, yoga nidra. All of these practices that help us to be more in this parasympathetic nervous system where we can rest and digest. And the reason why this is so powerful for our pelvic health is consider where you hold your tension in your body. So notice right now if there's tension in your shoulders or in your jaw, like where are you holding tension if you are? We know how this tension can melt when we're practicing yoga. We feel our jaw soften or our shoulders soften, especially when someone's guiding us in a really nice shavasana and holding space for us. Did you know, though, that the pelvic floor muscles can often be holding tension, just like our shoulders or our jaw? And as we know, when muscles hold tension, they just don't work at their best potential. So when we use more restorative yoga practice to help to decrease that tension and help the pelvic floor muscles and all of the other muscles of the body to release that tension, then they can work optimally. So the fourth element here is information. For sure, I am providing information in this podcast. I am talking about different things. We can read books, we can listen to podcasts, we can go to trainings. We are constantly taking in information as yoga teachers and as yoga students. So I consider these external information sources. This is where we go see our physiotherapists and they talk to us about movement, or we maybe learn how our pelvic floor muscles work together, where we can engage the muscles before we lift or cough, or how we go to a yoga course and the teacher is talking about anatomy of the pelvic floor, maybe the bony pelvis, all of this external information. But there's also this amazing information that comes from internal. And this is where we provide this space as yoga teachers for students to come to an awareness of what's going on in their body and their mind. And we know that yoga helps to increase this awareness, this union of body and mind. And because pelvic health issues are often not talked about in our daily conversation, someone can come to a yoga class, not even be chatting about pelvic health, and still have such a conversation internally about their own body. At one point, I considered becoming a pelvic floor physiotherapist until I realized that what I was really passionate about doing was providing this space as a yoga teacher where students could come in and breathe and move and have that space to have that internal information, that awareness, that inner wisdom, to have that connection. So I'm really just there guiding. I talked about this a little bit more in our 8 Limbs podcast episode. And if you haven't heard that, go back and have a listen. It's at theconnectedyogateacher.com/73. And I talk about how the 8 limbs became my guide for my scope of practice, what I share with my yoga students. So what I love to do is work one-on-one with people who are dealing with pelvic health issues or who want to prevent them using yoga. So this 1 hour time focused on movement, breath, alignment, and information, mostly internal awareness, is the gift that I can offer someone, and is a gift I am honored to be able to be a part of. So to recap again, the 4 elements are breath, alignment, movement, and information. And again, that's external information and a lot of internal information. So next, I want to apply those 4 elements and the information that we just learned, along with some pelvic health information, to a few things that we do in yoga. And I would love it if you would tell me, if you try these out in your own yoga practice, how it feels, what you learn about your own body. I would love to hear that in the show notes comments. So if you go to theconnectedyogateacher.com/121, let me know. And if you're out and you're driving or you're surfing or you're walking or you're doing something where you're like, I can't do these things right now, don't worry. You can come back. We have clickable timestamps in our show notes. So let's first start with bridge. And this is one of the ones that really can be confusing at first and also offers such a nice light bulb moment for people sometimes. So remember how the pelvic floor and the diaphragm like to move together. They like to hang out together. They go down on the inhale and they go up on the exhale. And generally, in any yoga teacher training I've been in and in most yoga classes, bridge pose is often about lifting the pelvis on the inhale and lowering it down on the exhale. And this makes total sense when we're going for this expansion of the heart and the ribs on the inhale and this opening. So I am not saying this cue is wrong. What I would love for you to do is to try something different, and we'll just think about this and play around with it and notice. We notice in our own body what's going on. And then I'm going to talk about why after. So for now, if you can, come down to lie down on your back on the floor or outside on the earth. Bend your knees and plant your feet onto the earth, setting up for bridge. And we're going to make this a really small baby bridge. So notice your breath here for a moment. Inhale and expand the rib cage, and imagine that this rib cage is expanding out like an umbrella. As you inhale, it opens. And as you exhale, this umbrella closes and comes back to center. So find another inhale here as the ribs expand out like that umbrella. And then on the next exhale, press through the feet, lift the pelvis into a small baby bridge. And notice, this is really about noticing and the subtle movements. Lower the pelvis down on your inhale. And then when you take your next exhale, lift the pelvis. And what do you notice? If this feels really confusing for the brain and you're just like, this is not the bridge that I'm used to and it's a struggle, you might want to come into supported bridge. So to slide a bolster or blocks or a blanket underneath the sacrum and just to hang out here with the breath instead of flowing and moving with it. Sometimes this breath with the movement, if we're so used to doing it a different way, it can feel backwards or the brain just becomes frustrated. And so try it out, see what works best for you if you want to keep with the flowing or stay supported. I really feel like the light bulb moment for me was in supported bridge. So I've had 2 cesarean surgeries out of my 3 births and then another abdominal surgery for my appendix. So I feel like a pulling of the scar tissue when I hang out in supported bridge. And I really notice it on the exhale. And this makes sense because the pelvic floor and the diaphragm are moving back up towards my head on that exhale. So they're moving up. It made me laugh there for a moment because they're not moving up to my head. They're just moving towards my head. It's a really subtle movement. So just notice here for a moment whether you're flowing in that bridge or you're up on the supported bolster. Think about the pelvic floor and the diaphragm moving down on the inhale, moving down towards your knees. And on the exhale, they move up. There's no need to try and do anything. We're just noticing. It naturally happens. So with this knowing that the pelvic floor is lowering down on the inhale and rising back up on the exhale, doing bridge in the way that I just guided you through, where we exhale to lift the pelvis, it's like we stop trying to fight against gravity here. And this might be the point where you're like, oh my goodness, I need a visual here. This audio just isn't working for me. And so if you're wishing for a video, if you go to yogaanytime.com and use the promo code CROW, just like the bird, CROW, to sign up, because that means you get a free month. And then there's some great videos there. So there are some other aspects to this breath with bridge. We know that when we exhale to lift, it can help the muscles to engage, particularly the pelvic floor and the transversus abdominis muscles. And I feel like that's a whole other spiral we could go down. But if we have students who have pelvic girdle pain or pelvic organ prolapse, this can make such a difference to match the effort with the exhale. Try this in a few of your yoga poses. If you're used to inhale and open in a yoga pose, but it's a bit of effort, see what it's like to exhale there. And I don't mean switch it around and do it this way all the time. I mean, try it out. I cover this a lot more in the in-person and online yoga for pelvic health trainings. And I have to tell you that sometimes bridge is the point where people just get frustrated. Like, oh my gosh, I've been doing bridge this other way. Why was I doing that? They'll start to question different teacher training. Or, no, I'm used to doing it that way, so I want to keep doing it that way. And so just, be okay with that resistance that's going to come up when we change the breath or change the way we're used to doing something. And then play around with it and notice what you feel in your own body. So we've talked about ribcage breath instead of belly breathing. And one of my favorite ways to do this is by wrapping a yoga belt or resistant band around my ribs. So it might even be a towel or a belt, whatever you have. It might be your hands if you don't have access to something right now. So you might just bring your hands to your ribs where the thumbs are pointing to the back, the fingers are in front, and you're holding onto your lower ribs. If you're able to wrap a yoga belt or resistance band around your ribs, I like to cross the ends of the wrap at my front and then hold on to opposite ends. Again, this is in those videos on Yoga Anytime if you're just like, oh my gosh, show me a picture of this. So as you inhale, when you have something wrapped around the ribs, feel that expansion all the way around into that yoga belt or into the resistance band. And as you exhale, notice how the ribs soften as they come back to center. There are so many reasons why I love rib cage breath. A couple of them is that sometimes people become really fixated on what they should be doing with their pelvic floor in breath, especially if they have pelvic health issues going on. And so this focus on the rib cage takes it away. We know that when we're in alignment and we're doing rib cage breath, the movement with the diaphragm and pelvic floor is just going to happen naturally. And this is where the breath begins. So a lot of the time when I'm working in groups or working one-on-one, I will start with the rib cage. And you might notice that the rib cage in your students might not have a lot of movement. So you might want to test it out this week and see, ask people, do you feel like you can get your rib cage to move? And if not, then you want to start to look at, okay, what thoracic openers can I bring to these people? Okay, so those are 2 practices right now. This is bridge pose and rib cage breath. So bring those into your own practice. And here's one that I just feel like we need to talk more about this. And that is mula bandha, or core engagement, or pelvic floor engagement. I keep hearing about pelvic floor engagement in the yoga world, and I keep getting questions about it as well. People tag me all the time. How do I cue pelvic floor engagement? How do I cue mula bandha? And let me just tell you, I don't do this anymore. There is never a time anymore where I am working with a group class of people and I am telling them to engage their pelvic floor. So the reason why is because actually engaging the pelvic floor is often the opposite of what is needed. So sometimes the pelvic floor is holding too much tension, and there have been studies done that over 50% of the population is walking around holding that tension in their pelvic floor, men and women. And why does this happen? Well, just like we hold tension in the shoulders when we're stressed or when there's strain on the body, we can do the same thing with our pelvic floor muscles. So the last thing we want to do is then engage those muscles more. So think about this group class of yoga students in front of you. And we know that a lot of them are holding tension in the pelvic floor. There have been studies done to prove this. And so some of those people in your class might be holding so much tension that they're actually experiencing pelvic health issues, such as incontinence. So we have this misconception going around that if someone is experiencing incontinence or other pelvic health issues, then Kegels are the answer. And this is oftentimes the opposite of what's actually needed. The pelvic floor muscles need to be able to release that tension to work effectively. So if you want to play around with this and try this, try sitting on a bolster or a blanket or an exercise ball and bringing your perineum, that's the space between the genitals and the anus, bring that perineum in contact with the bolster, the ball, or the blanket. And then on the inhale, see if you can allow the pelvic floor to soften. See if you can allow the tension of the pelvic floor to release. And you might notice, you might feel, you might not though, you might notice that the perineum makes more contact with the bolster, the ball, or the blanket on your inhale. What I love is the analogy of a trampoline, not the analogy of a hammock, but instead let's think of the pelvic floor as a trampoline. It needs to have some give in order to work effectively, and the pelvic floor is just the same. If a trampoline is tightened too much, it won't work the way it's meant to work. And pelvic floor, same thing. If it's holding too much tension, it won't work effectively. So instead of cueing mula bandha or engagement of the pelvic floor or the core, encourage your students to go see a pelvic floor physiotherapist or physical therapist to learn how to do a proper Kegel, and then to find out if that's what they even need to be doing. There are some people who are like, oh my gosh, I've been doing Kegels for 20 years since I had my children. I just thought I need to keep doing that. And a lot of the time they don't need to be doing it. They might not even be doing it properly. And no one enjoys doing Kegel homework. It's not like a thing that you look forward to. So you might not even need to be doing it. That's why it's so important that you go and see a pelvic floor specialist, that physiotherapist, that physical therapist. And if you're teaching group classes, guess what? It's really simple. You don't have to know what their pelvic floor is doing. You don't need to cue their core or see if they're engaging their pelvic floor muscles properly. What I really love to focus on now is releasing that tension in the muscles, because then we know we cannot train tight tissue. So we know that if we release the tension in those muscles, then the core and the pelvic floor will effectively work together. And just as a little side note, the core, when I say the core, I mean the core four. So I mean the diaphragm and the pelvic floor, the transversus abdominis, and the multifidi. So there you go, connected yoga teachers. I am really honored to be able to hang out with you today and share why I feel so passionate about pelvic health, to share some of the really introductory information so that you can get it out there to your students, and also to share a practice that you can try and see. And let me know if it feels like it's a good fit for you, if you have further questions beyond this. And speaking of further questions, this is where I'm super excited that finally it's like the light bulb went off for my online Yoga for Pelvic Health offering. So many of you know that I teach a 20-hour in-person Yoga for Pelvic Health training to the people who can travel towards me, or if I can travel to them. Some of you know also that I share an 8-hour online Yoga for Pelvic Health training. And what's been happening with that online course is that I have been wanting to update it. So here's what happens. I learn new things and I want to add it to the course. And I add it to the in-person course. That's easy. It's not as easy to add it to the online course. So I have had it in my mind that I wanted to update the online course, but I wanted to create this way that I could update it so that it was like this curated bunch of information where I can start to gather information from all different modalities, all different healthcare workers that I'm learning from, working with, and bring it into one place. So I'm super excited that that's what's going to happen. I don't have everything done and ready for it yet. I'm telling you early about it. I'm telling you as I'm working on this, and I will make sure to link to, it'll either be a sign up for a wait list of how you can find out more, or it'll be a link to a website where you can find out more about this. So I did hold the website. I'm super excited. Let me tell you about that. And I need to give a huge shout out of thank you to Sean, because Sean helped me to name the Connected Yoga Teacher podcast. And he also helped me to name this. So it's Pelvic Health Professionals. So at some point when you go to pelvichealthprofessionals.com, you're going to start to see some information show up here. And it is for anyone who's interested in learning about or sharing pelvic health. It's going to be very cool, very interactive. We'll have a Facebook group. We'll have a place where all of the information is stored, where you can go and click and see videos and see information and get to the information that you want to get to without having to scroll through hours and hours of video. We will also have a chance to have live Q&A calls and some expert calls. So I'm super excited. I also just have to tell you, it's in this vulnerable baby stage of creating something new. So it's exciting. And there are also days where I feel really stuck. So I'm telling you here that the beta launch is going out to everyone who has signed up for the online Yoga for Pelvic Health training. And then there will be a larger launch in September. So keep your eyes open for all of that. And I will be telling you more on the podcast as well. I have a few thank yous to share before I sign off. So a huge thank you to our team, Samantha, Suzanne, Crunch, and Cindy, for making so much possible. Oh my gosh, this team is amazing, and they just do so much each and every week. Also, big shout out to one of our raving fans and a podcast listener, How Nani. How Nani connects with me now and then, and she just told me that she finished listening to all of the podcast episodes. So How Nani, I hope you're listening to this one. How Nani left a review. I try and read our reviews on the podcast here. And so she said, the amount of business and professional support available on this podcast and the search function of the Facebook group are invaluable. If your Dharma is sharing yoga and or Ayurveda, this podcast and community will be one of your go-to sources for ideas, inspiration, and business. Thank you so much, Haunani. We've been chatting about how maybe at some point we might be able to get together in person, and I really hope that happens. Okay, connected yoga teachers, it is time for me to sign off, but let's keep the conversation going. Connect in our live Q&A call, come and connect in our Facebook group, or leave a question or comment in the show notes. And I want to know, what will you be doing this week to stay connected to yourself, to your yoga practice, and to your community so that you can share the yoga that lights you up?